Hey folks, in this entry we'll be taking a look at Inspector Javert, the antagonist of the 2012 film adaptation of Victor Hugo's novel Les Misérables. Javert is arguably the most complex and tragic character in the story. As someone on the right side of the law, he remains an antagonist against the themes of mercy and redemption, to the point where it culminates in death by his own hand. Javert is a man of strict justice, a stern and stoic man whose expression in the film never shows any indication of joy. His self-image is summed up in the lyrics where he sings, "I am the law." Much of his psyche was shaped by his upbringing, in which he was born in a jail and describes himself as from the gutter, like Valjean. Perhaps Javert must have been surrounded by the absolute worst of society, which gives rise to his condemning view of criminals. It is there, in the dreadful conditions of the prison, that Javert becomes keenly aware of the punishment that those who transgress against the law would receive. The image of such punishment became so etched in his mind that he resolved to always be on the right side of the law. In Javert's eyes, he sees himself as God's righteous servant, sent to administer justice on all who transgress against the law. In his song titled Stars, he mentions that those who falter and those who fall must pay the price. Javert's sense of justice is so strict that no offense can be overlooked, not even the breaking of a parole that was committed decades ago. And even though Valjean has been long reformed and is a functioning member of society, and while not covered in the film, in the novel, Javert is said to be willing to even arrest his father for escaping prison and his mother should she break her parole. Despite his flaws, one thing that Javert is not is a hypocrite, applying the same strict standard that he applies on others to himself. After he mistakenly thinks he has falsely accused Valjean, a relatively small mistake which anyone can make, he turns himself in and asks for Valjean to press charges against him, being open to whatever ramifications of his actions. Javert's childhood in prison also gives rise to another aspect of his thinking, namely his black and white approach to the law. In his eyes, there are only two kinds of people, those who keep the law and those who don't. Because of this black and white view, there is no room for any morally gray areas in his reasoning. He isn't moved at all by the fact that Valjean's stealing of bread was to feed his dying nephew, or that Fantine struck the man in self-defense, as she was first assaulted. Therefore, the concept of mercy eludes him, and gives rise to his stone-cold heart, where he turns a deaf ear to their cries, dismissing them as protestations which he has ignored for the past 20 years. In the opening scene, some of the men claim to be innocent as well, and it's likely that a good number of them were victims of an overly harsh sentence like Valjean. Perhaps Javert's absence of mercy is a sign of tragedy on his part, that he himself was never the recipient of any compassion. Ultimately, we can only give what we have. And maybe if Javert had experienced some undeserved kindness earlier in his life, he might have turned his life around, just like Valjean. Javert's polarizing perception of criminals also gives rise to his disdain for them and his holier-than-thou perception. In the opening song, the lyrics "look down" are constantly repeated, a double play on words indicating the sense of shame the slaves undergo, as well as Javert's act of figuratively and literally looking down on them from above. Later in the film, before the French Revolution, he labels as vermin, worms, and maggots. Those who transgress the law, in his mind, are condemned for life. He tells Valjean that men like you can never change, and negates his identity by referring to him as 24601. In his hard style of justice, Javert believes he is acting as a representative of God, when in reality the concepts of mercy and forgiveness are key themes in the Christian faith that he so professes. It's been said that mercy without justice is the mother of dissolution, but at the same time, justice without mercy is cruelty. Javert is right to be suspicious of Valjean at first, as he left prison in a naturally bitter state. Valjean deserves justice for the theft of the silverware, But the mercy of the priest changed his heart and enabled him to turn his life around, embodying Lincoln's quote that mercy bears richer fruit than strict justice. The pivotal point for Javert comes when Valjean decides to show him mercy and spare his life. This disrupts Javert's worldview and causes his prior beliefs to come crashing down. Symbolically, in this scene, Javert is once again looking down at Valjean, now covered in excrement, a sign of the low opinion he has of him. But as Valjean crosses him at the steps, now Javert is looking up at the man he once despised. He cannot understand that such a man, a criminal whom he has condemned, would be capable of such benevolent behavior. Valjean had spared his life, and yet now he risks his life again to save Marius. At the moment, Javert faces a dilemma. Justice demands that Valjean be arrested, but Javert cannot bring himself to shoot a man whom he owes his life to, and by letting Valjean go, he could now be considered a criminal as well. Javert believes that God will punish the wicked, yet Valjean is a living contradiction of it, being allowed by God to prosper and become the mayor. In his final song, he asks, "Shall his sins be forgiven? Shall his crimes be reprieved?" For the first time in his life, doubt begins to creep in, and perhaps Javert was thinking that if he was wrong about Valjean, perhaps he was also wrong about numerous other criminals he condemned in the past, whose pleas he silenced. But most noteworthy of all is that Javert reveals that in his mind there is no room for mercy, not for others, and not even for himself. He despises Valjean's mercy, saying that he would spit his pity right back in his face. The culmination of it all shatters Javert's self-image, and a world where he is indebted to a criminal's mercy is hell to him, a world that he wants no part of. At the end, Javert was a man who was at war with his own nature. His act of letting Valjean go bears testament to the fact that deep down he himself agrees with the concept of mercy. Tragically, his pride and self-righteousness rejects that notion, and his act of ending himself represents his stubborn clinging to his old ways. So what do you think of Javert from Les Misérables, folks? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, check out this one here. Thanks for watching, and take care.